I begged Julia to have the opportunity to introduce with her Michelle Byers, our keynote speaker. So I've known Michelle for over 4 decades, and I can't think of a more important person to have this conversation. When we started planning this conference last year, we talked a bit about what should the origins of the conference and the theme be going through, and I suggested to Julia that we celebrate the 25th anniversary of the Governor's Council on Outdoors report, which actually recommended the preservation of 1 million more acres of farmland, open space, and historic sites. And the reason for doing that, I thought, was it's critically important that people have a metric, have a goal in mind, that we actually advance that idea of a big, hairy, audacious goal. And so one of the people that I started talking to when I was putting together a report on an update of that effort was Michelle Byers. Michelle is the former executive director of the New Jersey Conservation Foundation, and she worked there for 39 years and was executive director for 22 years. I can't think of a more dedicated advocate for preservation, planning, and good governance. She's retired, but her work, advocacy, and legacy continue to have a lasting impact on New Jersey's natural lands. During her tenure as executive director, Michelle ensured the preservation of over 60,000 acres and established nature preserves throughout New Jersey to encourage hiking, bird watching, and the enjoyment of nature for all New Jerseyans. She led the preservation of the now 11,500-acre Franklin Park Preserve, and I can remember the first time that we spoke about that and the excitement that you had about that effort. You had me at hello. Michelle worked to secure the passage of the New Jersey Highlands Water Quality and Planning Act, which we all know protects the drinking water supply for over 64% of New Jersey residents. She founded the New Jersey Land Conservation Rally, which is an annual conference of organizations, agencies, and citizens engaged in land conservation. And she was instrumental in several other organizations, including White's Bog Preservation Trust, Pinelands Preservation Alliance, Highlands Coalition, Hunter Land Trust, Rethink Energy New Jersey, and the New Jersey League of Conservation Voters. She serves on all sorts of different boards. I don't know how she has the time to be here, but we're thrilled that she's here. And most importantly, she served as the vice chair of the New Jersey State Planning Commission. And as a young staffer at the Office of State Planning, I always looked to Michelle for leadership, and I frequently sought her guidance. She was always fair, balanced, and deeply committed to a public planning process. She successfully advocated for the preservation of the Palisades and led the effort to result in the ultimate demise of Penn East Pipeline. She helped launch a multi-decade transformation of Camden City through a comprehensive parks and greenway initiative. She's been recognized for all sorts of awards, which I think one of the most important one probably to her, and certainly recognized to me, is the Friends of Hopewell Valley, the Edmund W. Stiles Stewardship Award, her late husband, who was a dear friend to a number of us. She currently consults with Landworks Advisory Group and is conducting a comprehensive assessment of land preservation needs and challenges for New Jersey, for the New Jersey Conservation Foundation. I recently had the pleasure of engaging Michelle in my research for the New Jersey State Policy Lab, where we analyzed land preservation over the last 25 years and provided recommendations for improving current open space, farmland, and historic preservation programs. Michelle reviewed our research and ground truth our recommendations. The report is actually on the conference website, and if you haven't read it, I encourage you to read it, and please find ways to spread the message on this. The basic point was that we wanted to say, after 25 years, where are we on the million-acre goal? And the punchline, basically, is we're only at 350,000 acres. There's a lot of work for us still to do. So Michelle is drafting this report and will lead the charge for the next wave of preservation. It's a call to action that asks the seminal question, why can't we preserve at least half of the lands left? And most important, Michelle inspires us with that infectious optimism that will lead you to say, why not? Thank you, Michelle, for all you've done. We and future generations are in your deep debt. Now I'd like to ask Julia Summers to come and talk a bit about her personal experiences with Michelle.
If she could take it back, she would make us take it back. No, I didn't do all of that. But I have to tell you, this is one of the nicest people you will ever meet, one of the most modest people you will ever meet, and one of the most amazingly accomplished people you will ever meet. I mean, if you think about all the things that Tom shared that Michelle has worked on, it's extraordinary. What's also extraordinary and unique to me is I love all my conservation friends, but the Conservation Foundation is really quite unusual in the conservation world because they have to raise money to preserve the land that they preserve. And in my experience, they don't like to piss off anybody. Being a policy organization is very unusual for a conservation organization. And when you think of all these things that Michelle has achieved, you got to know she's pissed off a few people in the process. And yet she's still been successful in helping preserve or inspire the preservation of all the land that you heard her talk about. So to me, it is very fitting. You've been given a handout. She wants you to critique what she's going to talk about, and she means it. She really does want to hear from you. What she's going to talk about, both her presentation, I think this is your dry run for this presentation because she's doing it again next month. This is just the beginning of figuring out what's happening next here in New Jersey with open space. But she wants to hear from you. She really does mean it. So to my very dear friend, with whom we love, I introduce Michelle Byers, who will be talking about what happens next in New Jersey, the nature of New Jersey.
Thank you, both of you guys. Okay, now I really am speechless. I kind of ruined my ability to talk about anything. But thank you all. I really appreciate the honor of being here and congratulate the Highlands Coalition on another successful conference. And it's really, really nice to see everyone here with their interest in land preservation coming together to figure out how to make this work in New Jersey. The first thing I want to say, as Julie mentioned, this is like a dry run. This is a work in progress. It's nowhere near complete. So I'm really asking questions still. I've spoken with 70 different people over the last year and a half to get input into these ideas about what's next. So I've been trying to be like a sponge and then figure out how to integrate everything into a way that makes sense. I started out with the idea of including everything from soup to nuts, land acquisition, land stewardship, land use planning, climate change, social issues within the environment. And that's how I sort of began this giant big ball of wax, and it's really whittled down to focusing almost primarily on land preservation and environmental protection for everyone. So that's a key piece for me, and I just think it's really important to see if this is working. I don't know if you know Wangari Maathai, but she's just like an incredibly inspiring world leader in terms of promoting the protection of the environment for everyone. And I do believe in that mantra of, acting locally and thinking globally. And I think that it's just so important for people to be inspired by this work. It's not just about, bucks and acres and numbers. It's really about land. And when I thought about the title of Reimagining Nature, I started to think about, well, what is nature, and what is our relationship to nature, and why do we care about it? And there's a slide later on in the program of the Oxford English Dictionary, which basically says nature is everything that doesn't include humans. So that's the sort of the dynamic that we live in our society, and we think of nature as outside of us, which is really kind of crazy because for 10,000 years the Lenni Lenape occupied this area of New Jersey, and they certainly did not think that way about nature. And our society and culture have been in New Jersey for 400 years. So those kinds of things kind of blow my mind just to think about, why do we lose that connection? How do we lose that connection, and what's happening with people in their connection to nature? Because I believe that nothing is really going to happen unless that connection is strong, and everyone has their own individual connection and relationship with nature. So that's kind of where I'm coming from. And, I've been just reading all kinds of fun books like Braiding Sweetgrass. I don't know if any of you have read that. Anybody read that book? Yeah, it's we talk about trying to blend science and our culture with indigenous culture, and how to talk about plants and animals and time and humans' relationships. It's mind-boggling, and so that's been part of what's been driving me to think about these things. And so words to me that are just more and more resonating are things like restorative, regenerative, rewilding, reciprocating, giving back, and those aren't things that you sort of think about when you're talking about land preservation. You're looking at, okay, this piece is threatened and we've got to preserve it, which of course is exactly what happens and should happen. So I just wanted to start out explaining a little bit about where I'm coming from in this whole report, which wasn't where I thought it was going to go when I started a year and a half ago. So the idea that I think is really important, that resonates with me, is that everyone in New Jersey needs nature in their neighborhood, not just to survive, but to thrive. Everyone. And when you think about that, that's everyone in the state, no matter where they live. And that's a big thing to take in. And Olivia Glenn said something to me, which I know is not her quote in particular, but it's really important. It's like, I can't be okay if everyone else isn't okay. And so I'm thinking about nature as part of land and resources that everyone needs for their life. And that, like I said, it's for everyone in New Jersey. So it's not just a matter of, what's next in terms of how many acres that we want to acquire, but it's also what's next and what we're going to do to make sure that everybody has clean, healthy water, air, a great place to live, access to parks. And so the other premise that I think is really important to me, and I don't know that everyone would agree with it, and I'd welcome feedback, I feel that land and nature are really critical to addressing these challenges. And the paradigm that we've had over the years of thinking that acquiring land and parks and all is a nice thing to have is a wrong paradigm. The paradigm is that they're essential to life, period, and we won't survive, and our children and our grandchildren won't survive if we don't really secure those resources. So in New Jersey, we're growing still. We're still the most densely populated state according to the most recent census. We're going to be hitting 10 million people in not too long. And now here's the thing. You're going to see a number up there, and I'm going to explain what that number's about as we go through. But that number is going to change because all the data that this report is based on is from 2015 land use land cover data. And in 2 weeks, I just heard from John Hussey, who's here, that is going to be updated to 2020 data. So it's going to change all the numbers. So I don't want anybody to get hung up on numbers. I just want you to think about, here we have a state that's 33% preserved. And here's the numbers I said don't look at, but you really need to look at them because these are what we have at the moment with the total land area of the state, 33% preserved, 37 developed. We have 30% of the state left according to this old outdated data. And then we ran the numbers again. Half of what's left is regulated, meaning it's environmentally constrained by wetlands regs, wetlands buffers, et cetera. The other 640,000, or 800,000, I'm sorry, is unregulated. And that's mostly our upland, our really important upland forests, upland farms with prime soils. Those are developable lands as opposed to the unregulated lands. So it's kind of good to have a picture, even if those numbers aren't right. I think it's important to think about, we're going to get updated numbers. It's going to say how much is preserved, how much is developed, and how much is left. And we're still going to have that unregulated versus developed. And we know that the stuff that's been unregulated is the most vulnerable. And what our little team has been talking about, and when I say little team, I really have literally talked to 70 advisors who've been looking at this in some form or fashion over the year and a half. And I'm getting ahead of myself a little bit on the slides, but is that we really ought to be looking at preserving half of what's left of remaining lands, and we ought to at least be preserving half of New Jersey, not 33%, but at least 50%. And I'll talk a little bit more about why. So you can see all we did here, and these charts aren't that important right now, again, because the numbers are going to change, but we did break the state down into regions: Atlantic Coast, Delaware Bay, Sourlands, Highlands, Planning and Preservation, Pine Barrens, Ridge and Valley, the Urban Corridor, Western Piedmont, and the percents that they are of the available lands. And so there's two basic recommendations in this report. One is to redouble efforts to expand land preservation to bring New Jersey up to 50% of its land area protected. And we'll be talking more about that a little bit later. But the second, and just as important, if not more important, recommendation is to encourage the state to establish a Green and Healthy Cities initiative to create a comprehensive investment program for the state's underserved communities, full stop. And it must be led by a Green and Healthy Cities task force made up of citizens from those communities. There are so many incredible local programs and organizations working in New Jersey right now, in our cities and towns, in our urban cities, in our communities of color. And they need support, they need resources, they're doing amazing things. And this is, I think, probably, well, I can't say it as a land conservationist. I can't say this is more important than preserving half of New Jersey. I think they're both really important, and they both are super important for the sustainability and the future of the state. Funding is always an issue. We do have funding from the state corporate business tax right now. There is some threat to that. It looks like a surcharge to that tax may expire at the end of the year. We could lose $60 million in annual funding. So that's an issue people need to be aware of and push back on. We've got lots of opportunities for federal funding. Stewardship funding. As I said before, this report is not addressing stewardship. That's just as an important, incredible issue that must be addressed. New Jersey must make a much bigger investment in managing public lands, as you heard earlier in the Fix Our Parks discussion. It's a huge underinvestment right now in our parks. So, this is a very, very difficult conversation to have with people. How could we possibly acquire more land if we can't take care of and we're already under investing in what we have? So that's starting from a weak point, if you will, especially with our legislators who are already talking about diverting the corporate business tax to maintenance and management of lands and away from acquisition, with the idea that, oh, haven't we preserved enough already? So I'm here to say, no, we haven't, and it's really important that we continue. The New York State just passed, which I'm sure many of you know, a multi-year $4.2 billion bond act for clean water, clean air, green jobs in New York. And I think something like that is needed for our cities and towns. Of course, we have these new federal acts that may provide some funding for these programs. So this is sort of wrapping up the executive summary. This report is designed to be a vision for how and where and what we need to do to invest in our future and ensure that the state can sustain itself going forward. So the idea for the vision for New Jersey, this is a list that all of you would be able to write up on a piece of paper in 5 minutes yourselves. It's not anything, mind-blowing. It's just all basic stuff that everybody should have in this state. And New Jersey's always been a leader. You guys all know that. We're always led on regional land use planning. We're leading on farmland preservation, on land preservation. It's always been an innovative state, but it has to continue to do that. So I kind of tried to get a little graphic here. And again, forget the numbers, but what would be the fate of the remaining lands in New Jersey? So just say, there's 1.46, according to this old data, million acres of land in New Jersey that has not yet been developed or preserved. It's about, 30% of the state. If there's no more preservation done, what do you think will happen to that land? Do you think it's going to sit there and just stay what it's doing now, which is providing flood control, water quality, filtration, wildlife habitat, food, clean air, recreational spaces on some of those private lands? Those lands will be threatened, and they'll be threatened from a number of things, not just warehouses and industrial solar arrays, but they're going to be threatened from outmigration from coastal and wetland areas. When people who can't live there anymore are going to move inland. And that is going to happen. It's going to threaten these areas of New Jersey that are not yet developed. So I think that's just one reason. But the most important reason to me is, if you think about all these lands performing their functions right now, if they get paved and developed, those functions will go away. So in the blink of an eye, in 10 or 20 years, New Jersey will have worse water quality, more runoff, less farmland, less wildlife habitat than it does now, just by not taking action. So if we maintain the status quo, just to sort of try to give some glaring, horrible slides, there's new development in Lakewood a couple years ago, a street scene in Camden, waterfront south, that's been completely neglected, and a major flood in Helmetta just 2 years ago. But if we move forward and preserve land and make it a big investment in our cities, and these are, kind of stock photos, they're not the best images, but I'm just trying to get you the idea of reclaiming our cities, restoring our cities, making them places that people can live in and feel like they can have a decent quality of life and environment. Those are the two choices we have. It doesn't have to be 750,000 acres. I think it needs to be an epic investment in the cities, and it needs to be at least half of New Jersey. Jane Goodall is one of my heroes. She's always talking about hope, and in her mind, and her quote's wonderful, but what she says is, you can have hope, but if you have hope with no action, it doesn't mean anything. And she's busy taking action around the world right now, which is why I'm so inspired by her. Today's threats and challenges, and you guys all know this, climate change is really huge. Environmental injustice, institutional racism, inequitable access to nature and a clean, healthy environment for everyone in Jersey, that's huge. But we're also losing our biodiversity, and that's not just because of climate change. That's been happening over decades because of loss of habitat, pesticides, herbicides, pathogens, deer are probably one of the biggies, as was mentioned earlier today. So, biodiversity is very much linked. Well, in fact, all of these things are linked together. You really can't look at them separately. Climate change, for example, has an inordinate impact on communities of color. The loss of biodiversity just has a major impact, not only on the richness of our natural diversity, but on pollinators and our, basically our food supply in the long run. And I talked earlier about the decline of engagement and relationship between people and nature. I think a lot of that because people just don't have it. A lot of people just grow up without having a stream corridor in the backyard, or a park, or even a backyard. And those things are really important in terms of connecting. If they're not there, you're not going to connect with them. In climate change, there's just a whole number of issues: flooding, sea level rise, wetter winters, drier summers. There's many I'm not going into all the strategies and recommendations under each of these because there's no time, but they're all in the report. Environmental injustice, decades of neglect and racism have created, some really tough problems in our industrialized cities, which were, a couple hundred years ago, they were the driving engines of our economic society. They were great places, but then as the industries left behind contamination and abandoned sites, and all along waterways in places that ought to be nice parks and swimmable and fishable areas, we have a lot of work to catch up on to rectify that situation for our citizens. So I talked a little bit about biodiversity again. Deer being, such an enormous horrible impact on our native plants. The only places that isn't happening are in areas with deer exclosure fences, which are extremely expensive to put up and maintain. So people in nature, I mean, this is one of the areas that I feel most concerned about, and why I brought up how important it is to have nature in every neighborhood. During the pandemic, I think everybody saw, and it's been reported on ad nauseum almost, about how people flocked to parks and trails and nature when they couldn't go anywhere else. But, you know, a lot of people that live in apartments that didn't have a backyard, they didn't really have that opportunity if there wasn't a park close by. But the science is now proven, and this goes back to the dynamic again where land is not a luxury, land is a necessity, because it's proven now with science that being in nature improves our mental health, our physical well-being. People do a much better job even recovering from illness. Even if they can just look out of a window and see trees, they recover better from illness. The science is starting to show. And there's a lot of really good data on that. We didn't have that data a while ago, but we do now. Other threats you guys all know, sprawl development right now is really concerning with the millions of square feet of warehouses. There's a continual renewal for single-family residential development, increased population. Another biggie that I think needs more attention, there's just really a lack of comprehensive planning still for all of the things that we need, public services. We have some great regional plans in New Jersey, the Pinelands, the Highlands, the DNR Canal Commission plans, but that's not enough. The state plan is, as Tom and I were both worked on forever, has some really good case law behind it and some good policies, but there's no teeth. It's a really tough situation. We need to take stock of our land use planning, and if we don't get a handle on that, it's even harder to address these other issues. Apathy, I'm worried about. You know, one of the things that fueled the environmental movement was concern about pollution. Rivers on fire, polluted waters that you couldn't drink or swim in anymore, you know, because there's been a lot of progress in that area. So those aren't as big a concerns. There's more quieter, secreter pollutions that we should all be more scared of now. But people aren't aware of them. And, you know, there's not the sprawl development threats that we used to have. You know, every other week in the 80s there was another big, you know, 1,000 unit development project proposed for a farm field. We're not seeing that anymore, so people aren't threatened. And you know, I've always heard that the only thing that likes change is a baby with a wet diaper. And that's kind of a sad testament to people, but you know, it's like, unless things are really bad, they're not really gonna be concerned. So you know, we don't have the kind of a really huge wake-up call. Even climate change is starting to filtrate into people's minds, but it's not really quite there yet. Lack of stewardship funding, we talked about that. So again, I just go back to preserving land is key, and it's key for a whole bunch of reasons. And the people, as I said, in the underserved communities need land as well. And one of the things that I heard over and over from everyone is like, you know, our cities and towns don't necessarily need to buy and add more land. They've got land. They've got land that needs to be cleaned up. They've got parks they don't even know they have that they don't go to because they're not safe. And they don't even have, you know, lights or police or trash or picnic table. So it's not that you need to buy a lot of land in our urban communities. Our urban communities need to be cleaned up and invested in, which is different from land acquisition. So that's why these are two different strategies. So Jay, who's not here, he was here earlier today, he has created this marvelous new report called the Conservationists of Color Playbook, and it's all about getting kids out into urban nature environments and helping them connect with nature, connect with trees, and also helping them possibly even to find a career path and find, you know, develop internships, paid internships to get kids working and getting involved in nature. All right, so we're going back to the recommendations again. I just want to jump right to the preservation priorities, which we've talked about already. And just a definition about regenerative agriculture, because that's something that you're hearing about more and more. I like it because it's broad, because it's based on science, because it deals with soils, it deals with wildlife, and it deals with water and ecosystem services and climate change. It's a type of agriculture that kind of looks at the whole thing holistically. So, it means you're not going to put Roundup all over. You're not going to use neonicotinoid sprays. You're going to use no-till. You're going to move towards more organic and sustainable practices. And New Jersey's moving in some areas in that direction, but if you drive down on Route 206 in South Jersey, sometime in spring, you will just see field after field after field of dead vegetation that's been sprayed with Roundup to get ready to plant with the Roundup Ready seeds. And that's just killing our pollinators and killing our soil. So that's why I just had to put a definition in here for regenerative, because I think that's a really important point. So we talked a little bit about the first recommendation of scaling up capacity to do more land acquisition. And I think, there's a couple of things about that I want to mention really quickly. That's not going to happen without increased staff capacity and without more money. Martha at Green Acres and her team, they're one of the best departments in the state as far as commitment to the mission and the results they produce and how hard they all work. But they need like 3 times that many people. They don't have enough appraisers. They don't have enough project review staffs. They don't have enough site remediation staff people to look at applications. And they need policies like we talked about earlier of streamlining the application. So you don't need to, in order to raise the money, you don't need to bring 5 partners in, each with their separate grants. I think that what we need is a green tape initiative to have a good hard look at our Green Acres and our farmland preservation programs and see what can be done to revamp them, reform them, and make them work faster and better for the landowners, for all of the agencies that are working on preserving land. I remember Christy Whitman came in, she said, we have to have a red tape commission, to expedite development. Well, I think we need a green tape initiative to come in and expedite preservation. It's got to happen, along with really some new hiring, because that's another problem we have with the whole DEP, and maybe perhaps with the entire workforce, is aging out. A lot of really institutional knowledge is starting to retire. At the DEP, for example, and without some real recruitment and hiring, we're going to be in trouble. We need leadership successional training. So the Green and Healthy Cities Initiative, I think, again, that's just something that's so important. The funding is going to be a big challenge, but the main thing is to make sure that the right people are at the table. And, let me just be honest, I'm not the right messenger for this program. I'm doing my best to try to capture what I've heard from people, and we have reached out to many members of the advocates in urban communities and programs, but I'm not the right person to talk about it. I'm just trying to help come up with some ideas and push towards making this happen. So the Conservation Blueprint, I'm going to talk about because I think it's a really cool tool, and John Hasse, who's the architect of that from Rowan University, is here. So if you have any specific questions about it, I'm going to direct it to John. But it's a geographic information system, so it's all on the online. Maps. If you love maps, you will love this. It's interactive, you can get online easily, and it's pretty user-friendly. And it was developed in cooperation, you can see, between Rowan and Nature Conservancy and JCF, and a whole slew of other partners who are probably many of here in the room. So this is a really important tool to help guide where to go and how to protect the remaining lands in New Jersey. But it's only one factor. So I think some of the other key factors are just really super important, like proximity to other existing conservation lands, linking to other conservation lands, key watershed lands, landscape scale projects that need filling in, because these are all systems that work together, and it's not one parcel at a time that's important, it's all part of a larger system. And one of our challenges is that New Jersey depends entirely on willing sellers, so we can't just go in and say, oh, we need this piece, we're going to go in and take it. It doesn't work that way. So again, this is the chart you saw earlier that's going to change. I'd be really interested to see how those numbers change, how much more preserved land there will be since there was in 2015, and how much more land was developed since 2015, and what's left. I can't wait to see that after looking at these numbers for so long. Again, we looked at the lands by region already. Land use type, they're broken into agricultural land, forest, water, wetland, and barren land, which is like some sort of a catch-all, I guess, for land that can't be categorized any other way. You might want to speak to that later if anyone has a question about it. So what we did here, and this is an example of the rankings. So again, I don't want you to get too wrapped up in this, but what we did was we took the entirety of the remaining acres that were left in New Jersey, 1.46 million acres, and we ranked only the medium to highest value lands. And it came up with like 1.3 million acres. So, so of what's left right now, according to this old data, almost all of it is considered to either to be medium to high quality conservation lands. It's not like we're looking at land that we could just say, oh, it's not important, So almost all that's left is probably important for one reason or another for preservation. So we have to figure out how are we going to draw some lines, because we can't just say, oh, we're going to preserve all of the remaining lands in New Jersey and only allow redevelopment from now on. I mean, I would love that, just so you know, but I don't think that's really a tenable recommendation, and we do have other public needs for sure. So we did another one, and here we just did the highest. So we just ranked only the highest lands in both unregulated and regulated. We came up with 900,000 acres. So if you take the highest conservation lands, it's still 900,000 out of the 1.46 million. So these are all numbers that are going to change. So again, I don't want to get too wrapped into it, but I think it's important to think about when we do know what's left, when we have the new numbers, what is that going to look like? And we're going to need everybody to rally around at least getting to half of New Jersey preserved. We've got to get at least to 50% preserved, and I don't know what that number is going to look like when we run the new numbers. And this was the very tippy top of conservation lands. It came out to about 340,000 acres. So we'll figure that out as we go run the new numbers. John says they're coming out in 2 weeks, and it's going to take his team a while to get those numbers and run all of the data again, because the data that goes into the conservation blueprint is just enormous. And I think it's going to take months, right, probably, to do that. And these are just little maps that show the various models that are used to form the basis of the ranking system. So there's an ecological model, and those lands that are critical to protect, to maintain ecosystems. So that includes water quality, rare species, climate change resilience, and habitat connectivity. And then there's an agricultural model, and that includes agricultural land use, soil quality, and proximity to already existing farmland. Water quality model in some ways overlaps with the ecological model, but again, that focuses on wetlands, water resources, floodplains, land surrounding headwater streams. And then there's a community green space model, and that's to protect the health, natural and agricultural lands close to people's residences, undeveloped land in floodplain. So that one's probably a little less easy to get your arms around to figure out what that means and how that might work. So anyway, I'm just going to run through the rest of this. There's a little bit of a description about water resources. And this is Robin Wall Kimmerer, who wrote Braiding Sweetgrass. She said, if we're looking for models of self-sustaining communities, we need no look further than an old-growth forest or the old-growth cultures they raised in symbiosis with them. So I think that's really important when we look at New Jersey's forests today, as many of them are moving towards old growth, and how rich their diversity can become if we encourage that. The state farmland program, just briefly, is they have targeted an additional 200 to 250,000 acres of farmland, and they want to get up to 500,000 acres total to maintain a viable agricultural industry. And that's kind of been a steady number for them for a long time, and they've been making good solid progress. But of course, with the rate that the programs are going right now, it'll probably be 100 years before we reach half of New Jersey. If you look at the rates of both green acres and farmland preservation, which is why it's so important to not just increase capacity and get more land, but to increase the pace. And you heard today about Outside Together, which is a fabulous update on New Jersey State Outdoor Recreation Plan. I wholly support Martha in her request to get everybody to go on the site and to comment. It's really important for her program and the state to know what people want and where they want it, so they can actually, make the dollars work for them. So benefits of preserved land, you guys know all this already. I'm not going to run through them. It's all pretty much self-explanatory. I think the things that are new over the last 20 years are how much knowledge we know now about health benefits and how much knowledge we know about economic benefits. There have been so many studies of the capital of land and what it does in terms of ecotourism, and creating economic advantages for taxes and so on. I mean, I don't even want to go into all of them. Trust for Public Land has been a leader in that area, and they have lots of good reports. Here's a list of economic benefits. We just talked about the SCORP, I think, had a quote in there that outdoor recreation itself accounts for 1.5% of New Jersey's gross domestic product, which is $20.3 billion. So that's just outdoor recreation alone. That doesn't account for agricultural products or ecosystem services like flood control or water quality, protection, all of those things. And all of this will be out in a report sometime in the next few months. So I'm not covering everything because I don't have time. And you don't want to hear it all. It's a lot. Population trends, again, we talked already about that. It's not going to lose its distinction at being the highest, most densely populated state, 1,200 people per square mile, and that we added 500,000 people in the last 10 years. More residents leave the state than move in, but that's offset from immigration from all over the world. So New Jersey's still growing and it's becoming more diverse. Congregating, continuing around cities. And there are trends in slowing of land consumption. I think the new land use land cover data is going to give a little bit more information on how that's happening. There was a gradual change in the last land cover data that showed some slowing of land consumption. So we'll see, what that looks like in the next numbers. So again, what is New Jersey's nature? Here's the definition. Nature is the phenomena of the physical world collectively, including plants, animals, the landscape, and other features and products of the earth, as opposed to humans or human creations. So I just think that's really interesting. That's how we think now, but yet, for 10,000 years, people didn't think that way. Another one of my heroes, David Attenborough, he's 97. He's still out there inspiring people. I hope he keeps going for a long, long time. New Jersey's geography, I'll just run through this really very quickly. New Jersey has so much diversity because of its geology and its physiographic regions. It's a really cool state. I mean, I always think of it like you could squeeze Maine and Florida together and then you would get New Jersey. It's not many states have that diversity. And here are the early history in the Lenape occupation. New Jersey Conservation Foundation has started putting this on all of its publications. And it's not on the screen. I don't think it's going to be on the, oh, here it is, yes. Recognizes that New Jersey lands are part of the traditional homelands of the Lenape people. We pay respect to the Lenape and other indigenous caretakers of these lands and waters, those who lived here before and generations to come. So I mean, it still continues to blow my mind. I can't wrap my head around 10,000 years of a steady state of human occupation, and now it's gone, and 400 years where I feel like I've grown up thinking it was always this way. Anyway, I just think it's really important to kind of keep that in the back of our minds when we're thinking about land. And, you know, the Land Conservancy of New Jersey just did a really wonderful transfer of land of Split Rock Mountain to the Ramapo Munsee Lenape Nation just last year. And New Jersey Conservation Foundation, as you might have heard earlier today, just transferred ownership of lands to the Nanticoke people down in Salem County about 2 months ago. So I think people are more aware, and there's a growing interest in trying to rectify some of these things and be more inclusive in the work that's being done with land preservation. So we just talked about that. All right, so just a couple of quick things. Land preservation and restoration, the greening our cities. You know, there's just so many benefits. You can't even add them all up, and they're all really important to people. Camden, we did, and I don't know how we're doing on time. Somebody's got to tell me if I need to quit so we can do Q&A. We did a case study of Camden City using the conservation blueprint, and we identified all of the various parts of the city that didn't have tree cover or didn't have access to a park, and where all the parks were. And we surveyed the community and found out most of the community didn't even know there were parks around the block because they didn't view them as parks because they weren't safe to go to. And that people that had no tree cover, we got the health data from the county, showed higher incidence of asthma and diabetes and other illnesses. So it's a little mini case study in conservation, trees, parks, and health. That was part of the conservation blueprint. And if you're more interested in that, I could tell you more about it. I'm not going to go into detail here. Suffice to say that Andy Cricken, who was the former director of the Camden County Municipal Utilities Authority, he managed to transform the Utilities Authority into a major park developer with using green infrastructure. And you can see, those are all the parks that he created. Thanks, Julia. Microforest in Elizabeth. This is a really cool project. These microforests that are being built in cities, they're about the size of a tennis court. They're just planted really thickly with young saplings and allowed to grow up, and they create shade, beauty for people in the community. It's not a one-fix-all thing, but if you combine that with a massive tree planting in cities, with microforests, urban farms, urban parks, trails along riverways, it wouldn't take long with a big investment like that to really start to completely transform our cities. It's just not impossible. It's really just not even rocket science. It's just a matter of commitment and investment. A bit from Jay's book, The Conservationists of Color Playbook. So he's talking about experiential learning and exposure for kids in urban communities, birding, urban farming, hiking, greening, plants, biking, camping, fishing. You know, it's really cool. And I don't know if you guys have met this guy, Tobias Fox in Newark. He is incredible. He is a brilliant thinker, and he's created a new paradigm and his own new nonprofit, new meaning within the last 10 years. And what he's working on is integrating urban agriculture with clean energy and ecological construction. So he's looking at creating an urban farm, bringing in solar, and maybe having like a little learning center. All of these things together. And his comment to me was, Well, you know, if you just talk about urban farms and you want to put a little garden in Newark or in a city, you know, the cities are fine with it. Yeah, sure, yeah, you can do that, but they don't think of it as anything important or real. And if there's another, you know, idea comes up for that land, the garden's gone. Gets developed, sold off to a developer, moved on to another project. So his feeling is, create something really institutional, something that people can, that the city officials can say, okay, that's meaningful. All right, so there's solar there, and there's a building there, so that's more than just a garden. It means, I mean, it's part of, you know, just trying to figure out where people are coming from and to meet them there, to try to find ways to get these things done. So I'm going to end with just some other concepts that I think are pretty cool. One is E.O. Wilson's Half-Earth project, where he called for preserving half of the earth, sea, and water to make sure that would end up saving about 85% of the world's diversity. I think it's a great theory. I think it's a cool thing to think about. In New Jersey, I think saving 50% of New Jersey is important for a whole host of other reasons other than what E.O. Wilson was talking about. But I love those kind of goals to get people thinking. Rewilding, I love. They're doing a lot of work on that in England. I don't really think that's so much of a progressive approach. I think it's not even a new approach. It's just, you know, having faith that nature knows what it's doing and you don't have to tell every little thing to do every day. It's like you know, those processes can heal themselves. They can regenerate. And that's a way that we can be thinking about, part of our own thinking about how reclaiming, restoring, rewilding, and regenerating our environment is part of that. And then the other person I think has just got so much good stuff to talk about is Doug Talamay, when he's trying to convince people to get rid of their lawns and their ornamentals and stop spraying and grow pollinators. You know, and all of his work on oak trees, I think, is, if you haven't followed that up, it's so interesting that the oak tends to be one of the most rich trees in terms of its biodiversity and its pollinator abilities. So I'm just going to end now with a couple of maps. These are all from the state. The one on the left shows all the green acres preserved land. The one in the middle is preserved farmland, and the one on the end is the combined. So that's pretty much a snapshot of where we are now. So if you see all that blank land that isn't either green or brown, that is what's at stake, and that's what will be developed in some form or fashion if we don't really take action and, you know, all get together and say the job's not done. We have to keep preserving land. So that's pretty much it. It needs a lot of funding, a lot of alignment, a lot of consensus, embracing by everybody. But I think the bottom line is that this is preventative medicine. And if we get ahead of it, this could make New Jersey a state that is completely livable, more livable now than it will be, and more livable today than it is now and into the future. So that's pretty much my draft presentation, and there'll be more to come after I get input from you and from more people and we finish the data. But I'd love to hear from you, and I thank you for honoring me by having me here and listening. Thanks. Okay, do we have time for questions?
We've got about 5 minutes if anybody has any questions.
I think I wore them all out. Bill.
Presented a lot of information that's available for download.
Not yet, but it will be. Yeah, it hasn't been copy edited, the numbers aren't final. You know, there's a lot of stuff that the team at NJCF has to review that I might have gotten a little ahead of them on, you know, all that kind of fun stuff. But we're getting there. Yep.
Any other questions? Well,
thank you.
There's one over there.
Do you think declaring on a federal or even a state level a climate crisis would have any impact on accomplishing any of these goals?
That's a really good question. I mean, the UN leader has declared a climate crisis, and I don't know if how much of a difference that's making around the world. You know, unfortunately, it's such a divisive time. I mean, even in my own family, you know, people don't believe in it. So I think, you know, it's really important to find ways to talk to people and not have that be the rallying cry, but be part of, you know, everything that we need to do. I don't know if that's helpful or not, but you know, what do you think? You have any ideas on that?
Well, I know that we're being told that talking too much about climate change is not persuading people, but if you talk about what's happening, everybody can see what's happening. We're here in Warren County, where we just had incredible damage on July 17th that resonated with people. Tremendous washout, tremendous damage. There was an emergency declared as a result, and people understand that.
So the last thing I want to do before I finish is just to thank the advisors. I know many of you are here in the room, and once I get a copy edit done, a little further along, that's going to go back out to all the advisors, of which there are 70. So I'm like deeply grateful for all of those people for helping with this. You reminded me back when I looked down aside.
Well, there's another set of workshops, and we do hope that you all don't go home, but that you go to the workshops, because we've got some great workshops for you. There is no closing event today. We hope you really enjoy the workshops. We're thrilled that you were here. We're deeply grateful that you came. We hope that we have been provocative, and that between our plenary, our workshops, and our great keynote, you're going home with a lot of ideas. So thank you very much for coming.